You're on the live stream.
Am I? Oh, that's lovely. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another development seminar, both to the people in the room and, of course, the people from all over the world, who I'm sure will be waking up at various time zones for the explicit promise of this Introduction to Closing development seminar. So what we talked about last week, just as a brief rehash for everyone, is just what is British parliamentary debating? Because especially if you're new to debating, BP can be incredibly weird. So just a reminder, there are 4 teams operating in benches. And so you've got 2 teams that are on the gov side and 2 teams that are on the op side. The 2 opening teams, opening gov and opening opposition, do essentially what you would do in any normal debate. They present arguments, they set up the debate. Next week, we'll be discussing specifically the unique particularities of what it is to give a good opening debate, if you're one of the opening positions. And then you have the 2 closing teams. And what they have to do is offer new arguments that don't contradict with their earlier team's material, but are argued in a way that makes them more important than those earlier teams' material. And the way I like to think about it is if you're in a parliament and you have 2 political parties, each supporting a proposition, they might support it for different reasons, and they're wanting to explain to the general public why people should come in, no worries, why people should come in and support their particular side of it. So that's how BP operates as a general framework, and then all the different teams are ranked, so you're comparing the different teams. I think closing government was the best in this debate because they beat all 3 teams, and they beat the closest team by doing this, 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 and this. That team, be it opening government, I think was able to beat the other 2 teams by doing X, Y, and Z. So you've got that interoperability, that competition between all of the teams. I've also got some very good debaters who are wandering in and around the place who will be popping in to give some examples and share their experiences with closing. So what we're specifically focusing on today is probably the weirdest thing for people who've never done BP debating before, and that's how to give an effective closing, a closing case and how to speak in the different closing positions well. So what you need to do at closing is offer an extension. And what I'm going to talk you through today is 3 things. I'm going to talk you through positive extensions, and that's essentially when you want to add something to the debate, add something new that is a brand new set of ideas, brand new positive contribution, substantive contribution that tries to advance the debate in a particular way. That's one way in which you can add a contribution to the debate. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about responsive material and how you should be responding to the different speakers within the debate, because that can also be an extension. That can also be a contribution. If you give really good responses to the ideas that have come from the other side that haven't been given by your opening team, that's obviously something that's very, very meaningful. And you want to beat those teams just to get yourself up in a general sense, like you would in any debate. And then the final thing I'll talk about, I like to think of it as the situational aspect of adding extensions. It's all about taking what you add to the debate and then explaining to the adjudicator how that fits into the way the debate has played out. Some people refer to it as framing. Some people refer to it as explaining differentiation. There's different things that you can call it, but it's specifically designed to take the debate as a whole and then walk through the judge as to why your addition is the one that they should care about most. That's an under-discussed skill from the closing teams. Throughout that, I'll also give some top tips on what you should be doing with your points of information as a closing team and what you should be doing when you start in the prep room. So I think potentially we should start there. You're sitting down at prep, you've been given closing, it's your first ever BP debate. What do you do? Last week we went through this quite quickly. What you want to do is just write down as many ideas as you can. Try and go as broad as possible and try and think about things that won't necessarily 100% be taken by the opposition. So it's the most obvious thing. Obviously you want to identify that. If your opening team doesn't take that, you're away running. It's like amazing, you get to run an opening case at closing. You're definitely going to win this debate. But you knowing that people are going to be speaking earlier than you, they're probably going to take some of those obvious ideas. So you want to go broad. So if you have, I'll often have like a list of my 6 extension ideas, the 6 things I want to add to the debate. It can be like really neat responses. Hey, we can do this in a way that undercuts what we think is likely material coming from the opposition. Can be positive stuff. Here's important things that we think we should be adding to the debate. I'll have that list and I'll be crossing things off, especially during the first speaker of my bench. So say I'm a closing government and the opening government is speaking in their first speech, the Prime Minister's speech. I'll be saying, oh my God, they talked about this thing and they talked about this thing. And then at the end of that speech, I'll probably have a couple of things that I think still stand within the debate or haven't been discussed yet. And then I'll start writing my speech and going through how am I going to make this stuff the most important material within the debate. So that's how it operates in terms of having your prep time and making sure you're using that in an effective way at closing. With points of information, I think there needs to be quite a delicate balance here, because obviously if you give a point of information, you only give the taste of an idea. And if you give a taste of an idea, your opening team can take that taste of the idea and turn it into a case at second. So you need to be careful about not entirely giving away everything you're going to want to talk about in a way that would allow your opening team just to gobble up all that material and give them a new addition to the debate. So when you're offering a point of information, when you're interjecting idea into the debate as it comes forward, a lot of it can be responsive. So if it's just a key line of response, if you give it in your point of information, then that should appropriately be credited to you, even if your opening team tries to steal that response, particularly if it's quite like a simple idea that you're able to really get the gist of it and overcome the point, you'll be credited for that. So making sure you are looking for those easy opportunities to hammer into the case from the other opening team. The second thing that you want to do is set traps for the opposition that lead into your material. So asking something that doesn't directly relate to your material, but forces a concession from the opposition or a commitment from them that you're then able to weaponize. Like, wouldn't you consider, how would you deal with this situation could be an example. And they'd be like, blah, 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 I deal with it in this way, walking directly into you being like, and that is a really bad thing for X, Y, and Z reasons. So sometimes you'll want to be setting up those traps that your opening team can't really figure out what you're going to do with it, but you are going to do something with it, and it's about creating those tensions in the opposition's case. And then, of course, the final thing you can do is you can just ask great POIs that waste everyone's time, and then they spend 6 minutes trying to deal with it. So you obviously don't want to ask stupid POIs, because the opposition will just like smack it in 2 seconds, and then the judge will be like, wow, that team was not very smart. Why did they offer such a silly POI? So the art of the point wasting POI isn't something that is silly, but it's something that forces them to engage with, even if you're not going to make it the gist of your case. And I'll give you an example. In a debate that Zachary and I did, and Zachary is wandering around somewhere outside, it was a debate about whether or not we would allow people to sue their parents for religiously indoctrinating them or giving them ideas that ended up hurting them. And so we were against this idea. And so we were like, what would be a good thing to get them to spend a lot of time talking about? We were at closing. And so we asked them why they wanted a suing system rather than a criminal law system, and rather than the government punishing people. And of course, their opening speaker was like, oh, I don't really get it. They spent 20 seconds on it. We kind of let it go. We were like, not very successful. That's fine. And then they got up at second and spent like 3 minutes explaining to us exactly why there's this distinction between the criminal and civil law systems. So I think that's and we were never going to talk about it. It could be a case, it could be an extension, it's not high on our list, but it forces them to engage with that material, which means obviously they've got less time to talk about stuff that could be more important. And so as an opening team, you kind of need to be on the lookout for that, making sure that you are keeping engaged with what you think is most important, really assessing the POIs they give you as to whether that is something that drives you towards what's most important. Okay, any questions about prep or points of information from anyone? Nope, all makes sense. Neat. Okay, so let's talk about the 3 things that are going to be our main chat for today. So the first is a positive contribution. And that is traditionally what people understand to be an extension. So say, for example, the debate is about legalizing drugs. One person stands up and says, the reason why we legalize drugs is to put lots of people in prison, and that's really, really bad. A good positive extension would be standing up and saying, well, we agree with that. It's bad to put people in prison, but more importantly, we make sure that drug addicts can get help. That is our big contribution. We help on the health side rather than the criminal side. So you're bringing a new argument that essentially tries to compare itself with the earlier arguments in a way that is favorable for them, and remembering that you can't contradict that earlier material. So everything that you are building is stuff that runs parallel to the arguments that have come before, as opposed to being something that directly cuts across it. So you need to be quite careful about not contradicting the team that has come before you. As I chatted about last session in less detail, there are 2 general types of these positive extensions. So one can be something like I discussed before, where it's something kind of entirely new. It sets up what we think the most important thing in the debate is this, and we're going to make that argument just like you would as if you were at first, and then explain to me why it's more important than anything else within the debate. So that's traditionally referred to as an external extension. It tries to bring something new into the debate. That should be contrasted with an internal extension. And an internal extension is when you have broadly the same goals, but you want to achieve them in different ways. So say if one person stands up and is like, we want to achieve less people going to jail, and they argue with points, and they really miss out some like key fundamental argument for why we actually are able to get people out of prison. And you say, we want the same thing, but importantly, the nuance we bring, the reason why we make this mechanism work is we add this bit of material, this is our extension, and then you move forward. You need to be careful with that because it can become quite easy for your point to become the same as what the other team has argued. And that's when it becomes derivative, and obviously if they've already made an argument, you can't be credited for that argument. You need to be bringing something new. And so you need to make it very explicit what the opening team has brought and why you are able to depart from that. And what then becomes very, very important is listening to your opening speakers, making sure you're writing down what they're saying so you can exactly lay out for the adjudicator how far their argument goes and what you are adding to it in order to make it effective. It is also quite true that you don't need to limit yourself to one addition to the debate. But what I often do is I'll add lots of internal extensions. So figuring out why I think the point for my opening team doesn't work and trying to fix it for them and making it very clear that I'm the one fixing it. It's not stuff that was already in their case. And then making sure I have some external extensions or one big external extension so I can make it very clear to the judge that I'm still adding something. Sometimes they will just take in everything in the debate, so you'll be forced to do internal extensions. But if you're feeling like your opening team has just put everything on the table and you can't really think of any new areas to take it in, generally, debates are going to be wide enough that they can't do everything perfectly in that time. So if they are trying to do everything, be really attuned to where they're skipping steps or where they're making assumptions that potentially can't be backed up, or they're under-analyzing their mechanisms, not really walking through why something happens, and then seizing on the opportunities to build that up, explaining they told you this, that's all well and good, but what's far more important is we add this mechanism, we're the one who makes it work. So does everyone understand the distinction between an internal and an external extension and where they might be useful and what you need to do to make sure they don't just fall out of the debate? Neat, so those are positive contributions. And so that is the thing that pops most obviously into mind when you think about an extension, because it's something new you bring to the debate in a positive way that tries to advance your case forward. The second thing that, especially in recent times, is more accepted as extension material, more accepted as a contribution. And I actually would just point out that the word extension has maybe become a little bit obsolete in the modern understanding of debating. What we really want from you is a contribution, and that contribution can look like a whole range of different things. It doesn't really need to be a traditional extension anymore, but using that language of what we're contributing, what we're adding to the debate is really what you want to get to the heart of. So if you have your positive extensions, you also have responsive extension material. And those are the new responses you are adding to earlier, adding on top of what your opening team has added, and which help you beat the arguments that come from the opposition. Often, and most likely, these will be arguments that are targeted against their opening teams, because obviously it's a little bit difficult to say, why didn't my opening team respond to the extension that came out after they had finished speaking? So obviously, there's a little bit of a responsiveness problem there, and you can't really use that to claim over your opening team. But if you are the one who's able to beat the opening opposition, for example, you're the one who should get the credit for adding that to the debate. You bring your team over the line in terms of responding to that. So responses can be a contribution. And once again, you need to be very clear where the responses from your opening team have started and where they have ended. You always need to be listening to your opening teams in order to say, hey, I think that they were able to add this to the point. If you don't think that's enough to beat the point, we add this thing, this thing, this thing, and this thing. Therefore, we're the ones who are able to beat the point. So making sure you're very clear on what exactly you're adding and why that contributes to the debate, because it is a big deal. If they are running away with the debate and they have amassed a huge impact on their side of the house that your opening team hasn't dealt with, it's a huge contribution to your side of the debate if you are the one who is able to stop that argument. And you should make it very clear to the judge, especially when your extension material is a little bit weaker. Make it very clear to the judge that you should be judged on both of these things. We've brought a not superb, but still like meaningful addition in terms of our positive extension material. We've explained to you some new things, but more importantly, we've destroyed the opposition, and we should be receiving a lot of credit for that. So those are the two types of extension that are traditionally understood, and there's different ways in which those can operate. this is what I think gets me to the last thing I want to chat about in that formal setting, and that's the situational awareness that is necessary when you are a closing team. And it's one of the things that makes BP debating like way more fun often than other types of debating, but often quite technical and still requires a lot from you. So it's not just being able to go in guns blazing and explain why you've got a cool new impact or a cool new response. You need to understand how the overall debate is operating. And so what this means is that when you are a closing team, try not to just get bogged down in what am I going to add? What am I going to contribute? What is going to be my extension? Make sure you are thinking about things in terms of how has this debate panned out in a whole? How does my contribution fit into the way that debate is operating? And then how am I able to beat every team? And if you're not able to beat every team, how am I able to come second? And if you're not able to beat the two other teams, how am I able to get the third in this debate? Because remember, getting third is a lot better than coming last within a debate. You still get 1 point. And if you come second, you still get 2 points. Being second is almost as good as winning in the BP session. In fact, at most tournaments, you can get second every single round until the final and still make the final. So like getting second and being able to do it consistently is quite a meaningful thing. And often that comes when they start to understand how the whole debate is panning out and how all the arguments fit together. So what I think is important that when you add your contribution, have some time at the end of each of your points and have some time in your introduction to explain clearly, this is how the debate has operated. Our opening teams have argued about this thing, and then we've had a contribution from the other closing team. Our contribution, which is X, beats this material by doing this, beats this material by doing this, and beats this material by doing that. So having that overall perspective that what you're adding doesn't just sit within the debate, but is helping you rise up the rankings and making sure you frame things in particular ways that move the debate in the direction that you want is a really important skill. And often what I think that comes from is trying to impose a narrative on the debate, being like, everyone in this debate has really misunderstood what is the most important thing within this debate. The reason why we take it over everyone is because they've all debated in this direction and we're able to take it in the direction that's most important. So make sure you keep that framing in mind. Any questions from anyone about extensions or closing in general then? So I think that's the technical understanding. Yeah.
And what's the real difference between a situational aspect consideration and a positive extension that where you say, I agree, but more importantly, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So the question there was, what's the difference between the situational stuff I was discussing at the end versus a positive extension when you're relatively weighing with other points? So obviously your positive material is one part of what you're going to be doing situationally, and your responsive material is part of what you're doing situationally. So the first thing to say is that you're looking both at your responsiveness and your positive material, and say you're in closing government and you're trying to explain why you beat the closing opposition, you'll be saying, I responded to closing opposition by saying this, 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 and this. So I think I'm going to be, I've mitigated a lot of what they can claim within the debate. Their argument isn't as strong as they wanted to claim it was. And I also added this positive material. So when you add one to the other, my contribution is bigger than their contribution. So the first thing is that you're adding both your responsive material and your positive material into that situational understanding. The second thing to say is what you were discussing there with the weighing of your positive material, saying this argument is more important than this argument. That is like, in some ways you can get tunnel focused when you do that. So say, for example, you just spend a lot of time explaining why your argument is more important than the argument that came out of opening. That's one clash, but then you have the diagonal clash and you have the clash with your other closing team. So what you really want to do is explain not just why one argument beats one other argument, but when you weigh up each of the different teams' contributions, where you should fall within that overall ranking. And part of that overall ranking will be saying, they brought this positive contribution, we brought this positive contribution, our positive contribution is more important than that, therefore we take it over them. And then just doing that same approach for the other people as part of that general weighing of both your positive and your responsive material. So it's like you were describing like the laser focus aspect. You're just applying it to one part of the opposition's team, but obviously they're going to be contributing a few things, and then obviously there's a whole debate that operates in. So it's just the increasing circles of material.
This is a situational aspect with something broader.
Yeah.
Point out there that makes your argument superior.
Yeah, and that's the big difference between 3v3 debating and BP debating. So in 3v3, you're going to be doing a lot of that laser focus, being like, here's what they offered, here's what I've offered. The team that wins is the team that's able to win. If you are doing that in BP, judges will be judging in different ways. They won't weigh things as much as you want. You have to do it against 3 different teams, and that's quite a juggling act as opposed to in 3v3. So what you're describing is one aspect of how you do it, but you need to have that overall perspective of being like, okay, which is the team that I think is coming first within the debate now? How am I able to beat with them? If they're too good, if they're miles better than me and they've run away with this debate, how can I get second on their coattails? If I've been crushed by the opening half of the debate, they've taken everything, it's just me and the other closing team desperately trying to find material, why am I the one who gets the third instead of them? So it's thinking about things in that descending order of how well you can go within the debate. And I think what a useful tool is to try and identify the best team and then try and make your material mesh with their material so you rise together. So often what's really fun at closing is if the opening teams have spent the whole time talking about some clash that you think is kind of irrelevant, you can stand up and be like, this debate is going to be a closing debate because the most important issue is this. Both of the opening teams have entirely misunderstood the point of this debate and are probably going to come third and fourth within this debate. So identifying where you have that really strong engagement with another team and then being able to run away. Equally at diagonal, if like the other opening team has brought a really strong argument and then your opening team has taken an irrelevant argument and then you're like, I am the team that directly contributes with the strongest material that came from their bench. We are the 2 most relevant teams. You can suck yourself up to getting a second. Maybe you can get a first, but sometimes that material is too good. But you just have that awareness of what's happening in the debate and altogether as to where you prioritize your time. You want to either take out the weakest team, ensure you get that third, or engage as much as you can with the strongest team, and hopefully you rise together. Yeah.
So do you like outright say these 2 teams like get third and fourth?
So
are you allowed to say these teams, the contributions they've brought, that's only worthy of third and fourth? Like, do you kind of like outright kind of like label it like that?
Do I? Not that much. So I'll often say things like, I think this is a closing half debate because us 2 teams have engaged with the most important issue, which is this. Therefore, I should get the first, or I should at least get the second. The implied bit is I should at least get the second, but I'll be like, I get the first, I talk about the most important issue, and it's been a closing half thing. And then hopefully the other closing team is like, yes, we agree. It's a closing half debate. We've smacked the opening side. So I'll be quite explicit the way I do it, or I'll be like, I think this is the most important issue is the diagonal. I've been able to engage with their best case. Therefore, this is the most important issue. And then the assumption is that by the adjudicator, that these are the 2 teams that should be rising to the top. Or I'll be like, my opening team obliterated their opening team, but I doubly obliterated their opening team. So it's definitely going to be like a bench win. So it's just having that mindset and being explicit to the judge about what's important within the debate, which are the teams that have engaged with that important material. And if teams haven't engaged with that important material, tell them, just be like, I'm sorry, your argument, while technically sound by opening team, wasn't able to engage with the responses by the opening, that it is just irrelevant and boring. And therefore, we're going to be the team that goes through because we engage with that material. Comparatively, my frequent whip partner who speaks whip in my closing teams, Zachary Chambers, will very explicitly be like, adjudicator, you cannot give this team more than the third in this debate. They have been terrible. And they have never engaged with the most important issue. So he'll be very explicit. He'll actually just like tell the judge the rankings. He'll be like, well, I think we get the first. This team, they've been okay. They get the second, but third and fourth, dear God, you should tank them. They have been awful. So you can have varying degrees of explicitness that you will discover yourself how effective the different versions are. Yeah, I like the way that I do it. It's much nicer. Yeah.
Would it be considered knifing if you say how your opening team should be or something like that?
No, you can be, because knifing is about contradicting their analysis. So if they're being irrelevant and they've never explained why they're relevant, say it's a debate about legalizing drugs, and they're like, we think there are compelling arguments for legalizing alcohol. You can just be like, we agree, there are very compelling reasons to legalize alcohol, but as our opposition has pointed out, this is a debate about drugs. While we respect their contribution, we are the team that comes first because we engage with the debate. So that's not considered knifing. Knifing would be to say, no, you don't get those gains on alcohol. You can't really rebut your opening points, but you can explain why yours is more important. And like Zach will do this in a very generous way. He'll be like, opening team, we value your contribution. You tried your best, but you utterly missed the point of this debate, and you will come forth. So he'll be very explicit in the way that he deals with it. And yeah, but also be careful, because some judges will be like, wow, they were mean to their opening team, therefore they're knifing. That is bad judging. Don't do that. But some teams do it. And so I'm often very careful and clear to being like, we're not knifing for these reasons, but they're still going to lose. And there's actually be like, Daniel's too nice. They're going to lose for a bajillion reasons. Yeah.
So when the closing speaker is dealing with the opposition, not like their own side of the team, so what's the difference between the closing speaker dealing with the opposition and the rebuttal of the first speaker in 3v3?
Yeah, so firstly, it's the situational awareness that you don't want to help your opening team, you want to help you. So say, for example, your opening team has brought out great responses. As a third speaker, if my first two speakers had come out and given great responses, I'd be like, amazing responses, look at these awesome responses, no engagement from the opposition, they lose. I wouldn't do that as a member or a whip speaker, because I'd be like, God, I hope the adjudicator doesn't realize how good those responses are. The most important responses, the stuff that we gave you. Here are our excellent responses. There's a huge problem of whipping or doing too much to help your opening team or rebuilding your opening team's material. That's not your job. Let them crash and burn unless it's necessary for you to win the debate. You want to add the new stuff and very clearly explain why you're the team that builds that material. Yeah, does that, sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Neat, yeah.
When you said you're gonna mesh your material with top team, what if like they're the opening government and you're the closing opposition? Do you just say like, oh, we prioritize the same things? Because your points probably won't be too similar.
Yeah. What I would say is that you're going to be making that probably when your points are similar, they're just on either sides of the coin. So say, for example, it was the debate about drugs and your opening team made a point about health, the other team made a point about criminalization, and you think they have really smashed the other team in explaining why health isn't a big factor. You can win the debate, or at least come second, by being like, we think that what is most important in this debate is criminalization. We just don't think you get it in the way that they claimed. This is the most important clash within the debate. Yeah, and then really putting all of your time into dealing with that. Sometimes that's not the best option, because if they're really running away and you're just like throwing water balloons against the enormous iron wall that they've erected, sometimes it's better just to like shoot down what everyone else is doing and just kind of like, okay, they've won the debate, let's just like not think about them anymore. We get it, you guys are better than us. You bubbled down, we bubbled really far up. Just like let them go and make sure you engage with that. But I think judges really credit like decent attempts to deal with the strongest material within the debate. And even if you can't beat it, that can still be a solid contribution to the overall side, especially if your opening team is just like flopped and able to deal with it. At least it can get you a third over your opening team. Yeah, cool. Any other questions? Shah, do you have any fun closing stories you want to tell?
Closing stories.
Closing time.
Well, I would say that the biggest thing to do when you're closing is to, yeah, so I think Daniel would have already talked about this, is to figure out exactly what, so the thing about BP as opposed to the 3-on-3 debate is it's more about positioning and strategy as to where you want to be in the debate. So the biggest thing you do when you listen to the opening half is to think about who's winning and why they're winning, right? And if, for example, your opening team is winning at the moment, then you need to kind of focus more about your own side. I think the biggest tendency people do is like, oh, we're winning on our side, let's just keep hammering at the other side, but you're not going to get the first step, right? So then you need to think about a unique way of extending outwards or inwards, as Daniel would have told you. But the opposite thing is if the opposition side is winning and your team is kind of caked it, then you can think about more about responding to their side. And I think the biggest thing, I think Daniel again might have talked about this, that I'd say, is that arguments from, there are no arguments that are solely on one side or the other, right? You can just go on to the other side's case, and the most powerful thing you can do at closing is say, all right, our opening has talked about this particular context. The opposition side thinks something else would happen. Let's take them at their best, right? And use that and respond to that best case. You know, in 3-on-3 debating, they're like, no, that doesn't happen. And you can just be like, no, okay, fine, well, say that happens. Even then, how do you still win?
Yeah.
And the best way to do is force the closing other team has to deal with that as well, right?
Yeah.
You've accepted all that benefits and they can't really extend out.
And that's what we were talking about, I think, last session when we talked about the fact that you form alliances within BP debating, not just on your bench. That's something that people often mistake. They're like, obviously the team that I like most is the team that had, is the team that had the same side as me because we're arguing for the same thing. No. Often you'll make friends with like the diagonal team or the closing team or the other opening team when you're making POIs. And because you're trying to slice the debate in a particular way, and you can be first and second with any of the three teams that are operating. So really don't feel limited to have to help your opening side, and also don't help your opening side. People spend way too much time being like, they were mean to our opening team, they were ungenerous to our opening team. Don't do that unless you actually have a strategic interest. Let them be ungenerous. That'll only harm them, but also might have the positive benefit of hurting your opening team. You don't like them. You want them to lose as well. And then explain why you are the one who brings the unique contribution that allows them to beat XYZ ungenerous attacks. Yeah. Any other questions? If not, we can do some exercises before pizza at, yeah, that's right, Auckland gets pizza. Not for the people online who decided not to come to our fun event. Or who lived overseas, sorry. Yeah.
Can we talk about how fun closing is?
Closing is so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, so closing can uniquely suck. I was in a debate against two teams that ended up being in the finals of Worlds, and we were the closing team. And this is actually when I was unstrategic, and Zach likes to lord this over me. They were the two opening teams. They just did everything, and they did everything so well. I like crossed things off my paper, and then if I had been as smart as them, I would have had to cross many more things off their paper because they brought ideas that were just like excellent. And then I spent way too much of my time being like, there has to be a way that I can win this debate, and then like hurling myself in various directions at our opening teams, whereas our other closing team were very sneaky, and they were like, we're definitely going to come at least like third or fourth in this debate. They're definitely going to come first and second. We just need to beat Auckland, who is currently hurling themselves aggressively at these excellent speakers. And so they sneakily took the third, and we took the resounding fourth within that debate. And that's just because we weren't strategic. We didn't recognize that there was nothing to talk about.
Much fun.
Yeah, BP's fun.
You don't have to actually be smart in providing like good argumentation or mechanizing things like you have to do in the 3-on-3 debate. And that's kind of a battle to the death.
Yeah,
You
there's
literally
nowhere to
just have
hide
be
in 3v3.
Smart enough to kind of frame yourself in the position you want to be in.
Yeah. There's like a killer instinct and a strategy to BP that I think doesn't exist in 3v3, because 3v3 is just like relentless. It's all down the same set of ideas. It's all trying to push one team over the other. Whereas in BP, you can just like take pot shots at people with POIs from the opening. You're kind of done after you're like, if you're the opening government, after 3 speeches out of 8 speeches, all you can do is offer points of information. So you have 2 options. You can either just like scroll through your phone and just try to tune out the rest of the debate, or you can just hurl things into the closing and see if you can make any waves. So it's lots of fun. It's also exhausting in a way that 3v3 I just don't think is. Like BP debating is so exhausting. It requires enormous amounts of concentration and listening and strategy. Sorry, doing BP well requires a lot of thinking and strategizing, and it's like a lot of off-the-ball movement if y'all like sports metaphors. Cool, any other questions? If not, I'll say goodbye to everyone online, and we can do some exercises before we get pizza at 6. Bye.